And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a returning good brother to the temple, the man behind Broken Blade Publishing, previously responsible for things like Streets of Peril and its expansion. Now coming to us with Oathhammer, which has its quick start currently on his website, the one and only Kyle Griswold. How you doing today, man?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It's always great to have you on, and thank you for putting up with the schedule hell that you and I ended up having respectively, where we were ships passing in the night a couple times.
I'm just glad we were able to make it work.
Yeah, I seem to have developed that habit of finding ways to make it work. Now, obviously, we don't need to do the origin story. We've done that, but we've done that already. I think we did it twice for the two iterations of Streets of Peril, when it was originally a D20 based project, and then when you rejiggered it into a D6 based project. So with Oathhammer, just going through the theming of reclaiming dwarven holds and all that, I do have to ask, did Dwarf Fortress play a part in any of it?
You know, it's funny. I never played Dwarf Fortress until I started to work on Oathhammer. And
so I'm
then
guessing I wasn't the only one who
I said, you
it.
know what, no one actually brought it up. I've always known of the game. I mean, I've always been aware of it. But for whatever reason, I thought, I might play it. So I've actually have played a little bit of Dwarf Fortress since starting the project.
Mm-hmm. So, given that, what was one of the main inspirations for doing Oathhammer and the theming that you're going with?
Well, originally, the motivation for this was I had several people reach out to me after I did Streets of Peril, and they asked if I was going to do any additional rules that would facilitate more high fantasy play, and so people could play things like elves and dwarves and everything else. And originally, the plan was to do a setting agnostic rule set, which was just going to essentially provide people all the tools they needed to play in their their high fantasy worlds. Mm-hmm. But as I started writing and working on the project, I realized that that I personally, I'm not a big fan of writing setting agnostic games. I know even like with Streets of Peril, so much of the rules reflect the setting. And I find that for me personally, as a game designer, it makes a much more, um, for me, it's more fulfilling. And then I also think it makes the rules more enjoyable too for the, and I've had multiple people tell me as far as Streets of Peril is concerned that they like the fact that the mechanics and the rules and the character options are all tied to the setting. Now, not everyone always likes that, and that was one of the reasons why people reached out about the high fantasy variant. But for me, it was very difficult to get into the mindset of writing things without having some sort of context as to what all these different rules and mechanics and character options existed within. So then then as I was trying to think about what I wanted to do as far as the setting, I knew that there were some game design choices that I wanted the setting to facilitate. So one of the big things what I wanted to do with Oathhammer was provide a lot of meaningful and early access to domain level play. And so I thought about what kind of setting would facilitate that. And so ultimately that was what led to this idea of Osric Isle, which is the setting's primary location, and this idea that there were these different dwarven kingdoms that were displaced by an orc invasion, and that now time has lapsed, and they have decided to go and reclaim the land,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore now there is some sort of meaningful reason why the characters are going to go and they're going to conquer territory and they're going to go and build settlements and spread out and create a domain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. And when you mentioned people wanting something a little bit more high fantasy, what immediately came to mind was drawing a parallel between this and Shadow of the Weird Wizard. You know, which is basically a high fantasy, more family fantasy take on Shadow of the Demon Lord.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that. I'm not familiar with that. That sounds really cool though.
Yeah, that's more or less what the intent was. People wanted a version of Shadow of the Demon Lord that they could play with their kids.
Ah, okay.
I mean,
Yeah, the I would say that along with having the more high fantasy elements, there's a different tone to Oathhammer. So
mhm,
with Streets of Peril, it's a sword and sorcery setting. So the characters are typically morally gray, and it's a lot smaller stake conflicts. It's people quarreling over um, alleyways to control, illegal black market trading, and people doing things like just scrounging up enough money to buy a merchant vessel so they can go sail and explore different islands, and it's a lot more. In that game, there is the mechanic which determines how much experience a character gets is based off of their ambitions, and so it's a very different game. It's also it's just like I said, it's a little more gritty. So then with Oathhammer, I wanted to try and take it in a different direction with it being uh, more heroic characters in mind, which is one of the reasons why I'm not using the ambition system. I'm instead using an oath system,
mhm.
and a lot of the inspiration for this was Tolkien's writing and the romantic Arthurian stories and a lot of the medieval sort of heroic stories like the Song of Roland.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's a different theme, and it's a lot less dark and gritty than Streets of Peril.
Yeah, but even with that, one of the things I'm curious about is in the full book, do you plan on having a conversion guide? So if somebody wanted to convert some of the character setups they have to from Streets of Peril into Oathhammer.
There probably won't be much of a need to do too much conversion there. Now, the one of the things that I've done with Oathhammer though is that it's essentially running off of a new revised version of Perilous D6. So there are a few things that'll get lost in translation,
Yeah.
but for
Well,
the most part, if it,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say for the most part, you could probably take your character sheet from Streets of Peril and run with it in Oathhammer uh, without too much changing.
Well, let's get into that. What would be some of the major changes to the Perilous D6 system from Streets of Peril into this? You already mentioned the the oath concept replacing ambition, but what would be some of the changes beyond that?
So there's just one of the things that I've been doing over the last 4 years or so since I've been writing Streets of Peril and working on supplements for it is I've been testing it and playing it, and one of the things that I just it's always been something I was not super satisfied with, but didn't know how to fix was attribute checks. So in the original Perilous D6 system, there were um, two different types of rolls you would make. You could either make an attribute check or a skill check. And attribute checks always suffered from a couple of different problems. One, if you have a difficulty value, which is like your target number, and you've designed it for skill checks, which can have anywhere from 1 to 10 dice in the dice pool, and then you're having people make attribute checks off that where they can only ever have up to 4, then it makes it very difficult to think about how you would create rules where you would have maybe an opposed role where someone is opposing an attribute check with a skill check, because the skill check is always going to have the advantage. And then the other problem is with that is that attribute or attribute ranks are fairly immutable, meaning that if once you create your character, however many ranks they have in an attribute, that's pretty much the way that they're always going to be, with some exception. And that means that there is no way to improve their ability to roll attribute checks. And I never that never really sat well with me, because even for the skills have always been designed in such a way that a more skilled character who's invested more time and training into a skill is going to outperform a character who's just predisposed to have natural gifts to do better, because you can have up to 4 ranks in an attribute which governs the skill, but the skill itself can have up to 6. Meaning that if you have a fighter who's got might 1 versus a fighter who has might 4, but the might 1 fighter has 6 ranks in fighting and the other one has none, he's going to be that fighter who's naturally not as physically gifted is going to still be a better fighter than the fighter who has no training, but is very strong. And so yeah, that's kind of the issue. I didn't like the attribute checks, and so I got rid of that, and now everything's a skill check. And then there were some other issues too with attribute checks. During play testing, we would have players who, and this question came up frequently, where they would have a trait which would say something like you roll red dice for agility checks. And then they would ask, well, since I roll red dice for agility checks and agility governs this skill, does that mean I get to roll red dice for all those skills? And that's not the case. So um, it solves a lot of problems mathematically, and then it also relieves people of having the ambiguity of trying to figure out some rules that I don't think were as intuitive for people as I wanted them to be. So that was the attribute checks. Magic's changed in Streets of Peril. Magic is just inherently way more dangerous. There is etheric manifestations and arcane backlash have been removed, and they've been swapped out. So in Streets of Peril, uh, you could do things like just create random magical phenomena, and sometimes it could be fairly dire. And then the other thing too is that you through arcane backlash, spellcasters suffered damage every time they rolled a 1 while making a magic check, and so that was the way in which to sort of keep magic in line, because obviously with the dice pool system, I don't do Vancian magic. The only thing that limits the spellcaster spellcasting is how much risk they want to incur. So for Oathhammer, I wanted to do something different. I didn't really want to do the more Warhammer style, like super deadly spellcasting. And so what I switched over to is a system of arcane stress. So now instead of incurring damage when you roll 1s, you incur a point of arcane stress, and then your character also has a stress threshold. So once you have more points of arcane stress than that exceeds your stress threshold, then you can't cast spells for the rest of the day. So again, it's still a little bit of, it's not Vancian. You are still sort of rewarded for being careful with your and conservative with your spell casting. If you're super liberal with spells, you may run out of the ability to cast spells for the day. But it's not quite as punishing as far as the lethality of it. And then on top of that, instead of having all of the spells just in a large list of spells, one of the things I thought about for Streets of Peril is separating the spells within kind of akin to like schools of magic for D&D.
Just
But
subcategories of
I didn't
spells.
subcategories of spells. But so what I did is I included the sorceress traditions, but the thing is that these traditions are interesting because they're not. I don't want to say that magic schools in D&D are arbitrary, but there's really nothing that makes one school significantly different than the other unless your character is more proficient with one school or the other. But
Yeah, there's not a whole
in
lot of
Oathhammer,
mechanical weight.
right? In Oathhammer, the different traditions are inherently different as far as there are mechanics that make them feel different and unique. And so, like, if you're casting Stygian magic, which is like your undead magic, your witchcraft, all your black magic, your character can uh, become corrupted and start actually being like physically drained of their vitality. I think something kind of like Raceland from Dragonlance. And so there's a very real risk, and that's something I talked about that in the lore in Streets of Peril. I liked the idea of certain types of magic being inherently more risky based off of how nefarious they are. And so that was one of the things I was managed to do with Oathhammer, is make all these different types of spells actually feel like they have, like you said, some weight to the mechanical weight to them.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things that can happen when it comes to a magic system is the fire and forget thing. This is one of the three principles of the Vancian model. That being a spell that say is going to be throwing a fireball is always going to be throwing that fireball at that range at that area of effect, and it cannot be changed. Hence, fire and forget. With Oathhammer, would there be options for casters to modify the effect in some way? Not in say making a fireball into a water ball or something like that, but just little tweaks.
That actually was originally going to be the way that all of the Perilous T6 magic system worked. Was that a spell would have a difficulty value, and that for every success that you got over that difficulty value, you could do something to modify the spell, like increase its range, increase damage dice, make the spell save more difficult. I may still include something like that, but ultimately, when we first started playtesting it, um, the fire and forget just made it easier for people to sort of grasp the system and wrestle with it. But I think that something kind of like meta magic from D&D, that might be something that I include back into the game for Oathhammer.
Probably raises.
I'd have to play test it. What?
Probably, I suppose one possibility that could be in consideration is some sort of raise, i.e., a baseline, but you can boost the difficulty to boost the effect instead of the other way around, where you're getting extra just
Oh
for
yeah,
rolling
yeah,
excess successes.
yeah.
Um,
You absolutely. In fact, yeah. In fact, for runic magic in the game, that's essentially how permanent runes work. Is that it's just it when you want to make a rune permanent, it just there's a default uh, increase to the difficulty value when you make the attempt. So you're right. You could do something like that too. You could just say something like, if you want to add a +2 bonus to the spell, it adds +2 difficulty to the spell, the magic check. So
yeah,
yeah, you could absolutely do something like that.
I feel that that'd be a way to give some use to low difficulty spells so that they can keep up with the higher echelons. Uh,
Yeah, and the only thing is, I'm gonna have to play test it because there's a few. I could see that there's already a couple spells that come to mind right now where I could see that if you could just boost the damage on them or change the range, that I think that there could be some problematic consequences of that. I'd have to think about it some more, but I there's essentially like right now there's like a magic missile type spell that
yeah, magic bolt.
ignores armor. Yeah, and well, there's Magic Bolt, which is just your spellcasters, like their default range attack. There's another one called I can't remember what it's called, and if, for example, you created a mechanic where you could increase the difficulty value, and then let's say it was increased damage, I could see that spell be getting out of hand, but that is something I could still easily explore and look at and see if that makes sense. But yeah,
Mhm.
no, that is something I've thought about in the past, and I definitely think that would be something that mechanically definitely would could work.
Yeah. Now, since you're dealing with the narrative motif of reclaiming dwarf holds, you already have the impetus to go into dungeons. So my next question on that front would be: have you considered putting in something to randomly create rooms, basically some sort of dungeon generation setup? And I'm only using dungeon as a catch-all.
Sure. I haven't gotten to that far yet. I'm not opposed to that. One of the things that I want to do, kind of one of my design philosophies for all these books is to kind of be as economic with them as possible while still providing the maximum amount of actual content. So, like Streets of Peril, my goal for Oathhammer is a complete game. So you buy one book and you got everything in there. But I also I'm really trying my hardest to avoid some of the bloat that I've seen in other games that I like. I've got a few games where like I love Dungeon Crawl Classics, but the book is huge, and like I would say probably almost all of that is just all these different spells and spell rules and everything else, and it's a cumbersome book. So I could definitely think about doing some sort of generator for dungeons. Right now there are tables for traveling, and because the other thing too with Oathhammer is uh, it's a it's designed around hex crawling. So there are already tables there for generating random encounters in the wilderness, or if you're the game master and you don't want to have to determine what every single feature is and every tile on the map, you can randomly generate all that as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we did while playtesting is to make it actually entertaining for me too, as a game master, is we would generate the features as the players went into the new territory. So sometimes it would be, so it was a surprise for everyone at the table, including me. Um, but yeah, I could definitely do something like that for dungeons. I don't know that I would get, I wouldn't get as detailed with it as say a game that is totally specialized around dungeon delving, like something like Shadow Dark.
Yeah, I could see it. It's something that I brought in as a possibility, since obviously creating a full on layout for any kind of hold is gonna be a tricky affair, especially if someone's campaign hinges entirely on that. And while mega dungeons are certainly a thing, it is also a thing not for the faint of heart. I
Yes.
like mega dungeons, but I'm also got to be honest.
It's funny. I've been playing role playing games for decades now. I've actually never, either as a player or as a game master, played in a mega dungeon. I've always wanted to try that experience, but and I think that maybe for Oathhammer this would be a good opportunity to try and think outside of my comfort zone, because I do think for potentially for random generation, I think there are some interesting things you could do, even if it was just tables, and the tables do different things, like
Mm-hmm.
what kinds of creatures occupy it, what kind of treasure is there, what kind of traps are there, are there are there other dangerous obstacles in there, like is there a portion of the hold that's been flooded out, or are there tunnels that have been collapsed? So I think there's definitely a lot of possibility, and then it would just come down to making sure that whatever is there is extremely usable, that game masters would want to use it, because that's again my whole design philosophy is I don't want to include anything that's just filler. The only thing I want to put in a book is stuff that I think that game masters and players are actually going to use.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get it. Now, what would you say have been some of the takeaways that you've gotten since you released the quick start?
Hmm. Well, let me think about some of the negative takeaways. So far, it's been like since I've released the quick start, I've had a lot of downloads. I've had several hundred downloads of it. I don't know, and uh, I don't know that I've actually had a lot of. I don't know if I've had any negative feedback yet for it. I've had several playtesters have reported that they really like it. The oath system has been popular so far. Um, and that was one of the things that I wasn't sure how well that would be received by a larger gaming audience because early on when we were playtesting it, I had one of the playtesters likened it to all the players having to be paladins. Uh, and then, but so far since I've actually released the quick start, and it's just people who have been downloading and playing and reaching out to me. People have said they've really enjoyed it. I'm trying to think what else are the takeaways that people have told me. Most of the feedback I've gotten is stuff that it's mechanical things that I've always sort of had feedback on for since it's still using that Perilous D6 system.
Mm-hmm.
People they like the small D6 dice pools. They love the dice colors. The dice colors are always very popular. The I would say the new classes. Got some good feedback from the new classes. Like one of the players on the Discord was saying that, or one of the game masters said they had a player who was playing a scout, and they were really. It felt very thematic to be able to have special abilities where you could bullseye and essentially, you know, perfectly land your ranged attack, and kind of like you would see in a classic fantasy hero. So I don't know. It's hard so far. I mean, most of the takeaways that I've had so far have not been quick start related. Um, the playtesting, we've been playtesting now for about a year, just in my own personal group, and I think one of the big first takeaways is unfortunately when I designed Streets of Peril, I was really conservative with how I balanced all the classes, and that I really didn't give any classes anything that was um, too powerful. And then I think when I very, very first started creating the classes for Oathhammer, I got a little carried away. Um, and now since then, it's been going back and scaling back the classes so that they're not too over the top as far as their competency. But it's still, I mean, that's still not a terrible thing because again, it's not a gritty sword and sorcerer game. It's okay if the players are a little more heroic and competent.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that. Now, with with that in mind, uh, are you planning on launching like a Kickstarter for the full book later on, either later this year or sometime next year?
Yeah, I'm gonna do a Kickstarter. My it's this, my philosophy for Kickstarters is that I don't do the Kickstarter or any kind of crowdfunding until the book is almost done. So so it I still got a little ways to go before I'll release it. It will not be out until 2025. Justin Gerard, who's doing all the art for the book, he's tied up with another project. So when he's available once again to do art, I'm going to have him finish up the art, and that's probably going to be the last real hang up as far as the release. But I don't. It's just it's just a really something I feel really strongly about is not asking for money until the project is mostly done.
Mm-hmm.
For Streets Apparel, I think from start to finish, I think I was able to push out that book in 3 months at the end of the Kickstarter, and for Storms over Sternberg, that was also similar. I was able to get that book in people's hands within 4 months of the Kickstarter closing. And right now, I'm also looking at some new printing options too. So if I can print domestically, that would cut down um, fulfillment by like another 6 weeks. So it's perfectly possible that once I do launch the Kickstarter for this, I might even be able to get this book in people's hands within 2 months, which would be awesome.
Yeah, I'll certainly be looking forward to that. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!